It started like any other quiet afternoon in the suburbs, birds chirping, sprinklers ticking across green lawns, kids laughing in the distance. But within minutes, the peace shattered. Two men in dark uniforms marched up the street, flashing cheap badges and barking orders. "Sir, step away from the yard. You're under arrest." The words cut through the air like a siren. Neighbors peeked from windows, one woman even lifting her phone to record. Everyone thought it was just another police matter. Everyone except Marcus Hill. Because Marcus instantly knew the truth. His instincts, sharpened from years as a Navy SEAL, screamed that these men were not who they pretended to be. Their uniforms didn't match, their boots were wrong, their patches looked like they had been printed at a copy shop. And their body language? Sloppy. Nervous. Dangerous, but not trained. This wasn't law enforcement. This was theater. Marcus didn't move. He didn't flinch. He just stood in his own front yard, water hose still in hand, watching them close in. Calm. Controlled. Like a predator waiting for the right moment. "Arrest?" he asked evenly, his voice carrying a quiet authority. "On what grounds?" The taller one, jittery and thin, spat out, "Violation of HOA rules. Disorderly conduct. Trespassing." Marcus almost laughed. "Trespassing? On my own lawn?" The shorter, stockier man stepped forward, puffing up his chest. "Don't get smart. We're authorized by the HOA to enforce the law." He shoved the badge an inch from Marcus's face. It gleamed in the sunlight, but up close, the plastic was cheap, the emblem off-center. Fake. So obviously fake. Neighbors gasped. To them, it looked like Marcus was defying police officers. To Marcus, it looked like two fools in costumes, trying to intimidate the wrong man. He let the silence hang, his sharp gaze locked on theirs. Years of covert ops had trained him to read an opponent without words, their breathing, the way they shifted their weight, the way they avoided eye contact. And right now? Both men were rattled. Still, the stocky one tried again, his voice louder this time, almost desperate. "Last chance, pal. You either come quietly, or we make this ugly." Marcus slowly set the hose down. His jaw clenched just enough for them to notice. He wasn't afraid, he was calculating. His entire body radiated quiet strength. He took one step closer, his voice dropping to a razor-sharp whisper. "Walk away. Right now. Because if you lay a hand on me," he paused, his eyes narrowing like steel. "You'll regret it." The taller man scoffed, forcing a smirk. "Is that a threat?" Marcus gave the faintest smile. "No. That's a promise." From the safety of their blinds, neighbors whispered. Phones tilted to capture every second. The fake cops exchanged a glance, their earlier arrogance starting to crack. They could feel it, the weight of something they didn't understand. Because Marcus Hill wasn't just a man defending his yard. He was a Navy SEAL. A warrior trained to spot weakness, to control chaos, to crush threats before they escalated. And now, standing in his own neighborhood, he was ready to show these imposters exactly what kind of mistake they had made. The storm hadn't broken yet, but the air was charged, heavy, and dangerous. Everyone watching knew something was about to explode. And the HOA's fake cops? They had no idea they had just picked the wrong man to mess with. The two men stood stiff, their fake uniforms almost comical under the bright sun. From a distance, it might have looked real. To Marcus Hill, it was laughable. But he wasn't laughing. He was calculating. His mind was calm, almost too calm, like the quiet ocean just before a hurricane. Years of military training had rewired his instincts. Where an average man would panic, Marcus's thoughts became sharper, faster, colder. The tall man twitched again, clearly uncomfortable under Marcus's steady stare. "I said put your hands up," he barked, voice cracking slightly. Marcus didn't move. His silence was louder than any words. For a moment, the neighborhood seemed frozen. The sound of sprinklers, the distant bark of a dog, even the laughter of children, everything faded. All anyone could see was a standoff between two supposed cops and the man they thought was their easy target. But Marcus wasn't easy. He had been through too much. Images flickered in his mind, not as flashbacks but as reminders. The endless hours of SEAL training, running miles with sand-filled packs, diving into freezing waters, crawling through mud under live gunfire. The grueling hell week where most broke down and quit, but he endured. The missions overseas where he had to make life or death decisions in seconds. Compared to that, two imposters with cheap badges weren't even a threat. They were a nuisance. Still, Marcus knew nuisances could become dangerous if ignored. These men weren't here by accident. They had purpose, and someone had sent them. His suspicions circled back to the HOA president, Carl Whitmore, a man obsessed with control. For months, Carl had hounded Marcus with petty notices. Your trash bins were left out too long. Your grass is 2 inches too high. Your car doesn't fit community standards. Marcus had ignored it all. He wasn't here to fight about lawns and fences. He had fought real wars. He had lost friends. What did he care about the self-importance of a power-hungry HOA president? But clearly, Carl had escalated. And now Marcus wasn't just facing an annoying letter, he was staring down two desperate men, pretending to be the law. The stocky man finally grew bold again, jabbing a finger toward Marcus. I said move. We're not asking again. Marcus's voice was like steel. And I told you, walk away. The neighbors watching from their windows could feel it. They might not have known Marcus's background, but something about the way he carried himself, the way he didn't flinch, the way his words landed, it was intimidating. He wasn't loud. He didn't shout. But his presence was enough to shake the two so-called officers. The taller one leaned toward his partner, whispering just loud enough for Marcus to hear. Maybe we should call it in. This guy isn't budging. Marcus almost smiled. Call it in? To who? The HOA? His eyes narrowed, and he decided to remind them exactly who they were dealing with. Do you even understand what you're doing? He asked, his tone calm but edged with authority. Impersonating a police officer is a felony. Trying to unlawfully detain someone on their own property? That's prison time. And trust me, once I make one phone call, you'll both be in cuffs for real. The stocky man's face paled, but he covered it with anger, spitting back, You think you're tough, huh? Marcus finally took a step forward, closing the distance between them. His eyes locked on theirs, sharp, unblinking, the kind of stare that had once frozen armed insurgents thousands of miles away. You have no idea what tough is, he said quietly. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the neighbors held their breath, glued to the spectacle unfolding before them. The impostors shifted uneasily, their false confidence cracking like glass. They had expected fear, submission, maybe even begging. Instead, they were face to face with a man whose entire existence had been forged in the fires of war. And Marcus wasn't done. Here's how this is going to go, he continued, voice firm. You're going to turn around. You're going to leave my property. And you're going to think long and hard before you ever try something this stupid again. His words weren't a plea. They were an order. The kind of order that came from someone used to being obeyed. The taller man swallowed hard. His hand twitched toward the fake holster at his side, but he didn't draw. He couldn't. Something in Marcus's presence had stripped away whatever courage he thought he had. The stocky one glanced nervously at the houses around them. Curtains twitched. Phones were still recording. The neighborhood was watching, and now the imposters were trapped. Marcus stood motionless, waiting, giving them just enough rope to decide how badly they wanted to hang themselves. And in that heavy, electric moment, one truth became clear. They had no idea that the man they were trying to arrest wasn't just another neighbor. He was a Navy SEAL. And they had just stepped into the wrong fight. The air was heavy, charged with invisible electricity. Neighbors still peeked from blinds, a few phones were lifted higher, recording every second. The fake cops had wanted a show of power, now they had an audience. But Marcus Hill wasn't performing. He was waiting. The taller man wiped sweat from his brow, trying to mask his nerves with a sneer. "That's it," he growled, "you've asked for it." His partner, the stocky one, nodded eagerly, as if to hype himself up. "Grab him. Let's drag him out. Make him an example." Marcus didn't move. He didn't even blink. To the imposters, his calm looked like defiance. To Marcus, it was control. Complete control. The taller one lunged first, reaching for Marcus's arm. Big mistake. In less than a heartbeat, Marcus shifted his weight, twisting his wrist free and snapping the man's arm into a painful lock. The fake cop yelped, knees buckling. Gasps echoed from the nearby houses. It was over in seconds, but everyone watching knew they weren't looking at some ordinary homeowner. Marcus leaned in close, voice low but sharp as a blade. "I told you not to touch me." He released the hold, letting the man stumble back, clutching his arm, face twisted with shock. The stocky one cursed under his breath and charged, throwing a sloppy punch. Marcus sidestepped effortlessly, years of combat training guiding every movement. The punch missed by a mile. In the same smooth motion, Marcus caught his attacker's wrist, twisted it, and swept his leg, sending the man crashing to the grass. The crowd of silent neighbors nearly gasped in unison. Phones shook in their hands. What they were seeing didn't look like self-defense, it looked professional. Precise. Controlled. The stocky imposter groaned on the ground, gasping, You broke my wrist." Marcus crouched beside him, his voice calm, almost conversational. "If I broke it, you wouldn't be moving it right now." The taller one finally found his voice, shouting, "This is assault. You're going to jail." Marcus stood tall, towering over both of them, his eyes cold and steady. "No. This is me defending myself. And right now, you're the ones about to go to jail. Because every single neighbor here," he gestured subtly to the blinds, to the phones raised behind windows, "is recording. And they're not recording me. They're recording you." The imposters froze, realization dawning too late. Their attempt to intimidate Marcus had just flipped completely against them. The stocky one scrambled to his feet, breathing hard. "This isn't over," he spat, his bravado collapsing into desperation. "You'll regret this. We work for the HOA. We have power." Marcus stepped forward, his presence looming like a shadow, his voice steady as stone. "No. You don't have power. You have costumes. You have lies. And now, you have consequences." The taller one reached nervously for the fake badge pinned to his chest, but his hand trembled so badly it only drew more attention to the cheap, crooked emblem. Marcus didn't need to say more. The neighbors were whispering, some even stepping onto their porches now, emboldened by what they'd witnessed. A man across the street called out, "Hey! Those aren't real cops. I knew something was off." Another voice chimed in, "I'm calling the real police right now." The imposters' faces drained of color. The facade was collapsing, piece by piece, under the weight of truth and witnesses. Marcus crossed his arms, watching them squirm. He didn't need to strike again. He had already won. His silence, his control, his training, it all screamed louder than any punch. The taller one hissed at his partner, "Let's go. Now." But the stocky one resisted, glaring at Marcus with a mix of hate and fear. "This isn't over," he repeated, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Marcus leaned forward just slightly, enough to let his words sink deep. "You're right about one thing, it's not over. Because when the real cops get here, you'll be explaining those fake badges. And then, you'll be explaining them to a judge." The street was silent except for the sound of a phone dialing emergency services. The imposters shifted on their feet, caught between running and surrender. Marcus's expression never changed. Calm. Steady. Unshakable. This was the Navy SEAL way, not chaos, not rage. Control. Always control. And as the imposters finally backed away, muttering threats they didn't have the courage to carry out, Marcus knew one thing for certain. This battle was just beginning. The HOA had tried to break him with fear. But fear had no hold on a man who had already faced war. Blue and red lights flickered against the houses as the sound of sirens finally cut through the heavy silence of the neighborhood. Phones lowered, neighbors stepped farther out onto porches, and the fake cops froze like cornered animals. Their act had crumbled, and now reality was pulling up to the curb. A black and white squad car rolled to a stop, dust swirling from the tires. 2 uniformed officers stepped out, real ones this time. Their gear was crisp, their posture firm, and the authority in their movements made the imposters look even more pathetic by comparison. "Hands where we can see them," the lead officer barked. The fake cops immediately stiffened, fumbling to raise their hands. Their arrogance, their false bravado, all drained out of them. Marcus didn't move. He simply stood with his arms crossed, calm as ever, watching the charade unravel. The second officer scanned the scene, noting the neighbors, the phones, the tension still hanging in the air. "What's going on here?" he demanded. Before Marcus could answer, the taller imposter blurted, "This man assaulted us. He resisted arrest." His voice cracked under the weight of desperation. The real officers exchanged a glance, one of disbelief, the other of suspicion. "Arrest?" the lead officer asked slowly. "You two don't look like anyone from our department. Let me see your IDs." The imposters faltered. Their badges suddenly felt like burning coals on their chests. The shorter one stammered, We work for the HOA. They gave us authority." The officer cut him off sharply. "The HOA? Authority? That's impersonating law enforcement. That's a felony." Gasps rippled through the crowd of neighbors. Phones zoomed in closer. The taller imposter's face went pale, and for a moment it seemed he might collapse right there on the lawn. But then, a new voice sliced through the tension. "That won't be necessary, officers." Heads turned as Carl Whitmore, the HOA president, strutted into the scene. His polished shoes clicked against the pavement, his neatly pressed shirt gleamed white under the sun, and his smug grin radiated self-importance. He walked like a man who believed the street belonged to him. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Of course." Carl stopped in the middle of the yard, puffing up his chest as though he were the commander of some great army. "These men are with me," he announced. "I instructed them to enforce community standards. This homeowner has been a constant problem, ignoring rules, defying authority. I had to act." The officers turned to him, unimpressed. "Sir, are you admitting that you hired these two to impersonate police?" Carl waved dismissively, as though the law were a minor inconvenience. "Impersonation? No. They're simply security volunteers. They represent the HOA. We have full rights to ensure compliance in this neighborhood." The neighbors murmured among themselves, shock and disbelief spreading like wildfire. A woman whispered, "Security volunteers? Dressed as cops?" Another added, "That's illegal." Marcus finally spoke, his deep voice cutting clean through the noise. "You crossed the line, Carl." Carl snapped his gaze toward Marcus, his grin twisting into a sneer. "No, Marcus. You crossed the line the day you moved in and decided you were above the rules. We tried warnings. We tried fines. You ignored them all. So I took the next step." The lead officer stepped forward, his tone sharp. "The next step? Authorizing fake arrests? Sending imposters to harass a resident on his own property? Sir, you realize what you've done could land you in serious legal trouble." Carl's smirk wavered for the first time, but he quickly recovered. "I have the board's support. The HOA bylaws give me." Marcus cut him off, voice like steel. HOA bylaws don't trump federal law. And they don't scare me. You sent cowards in costumes to threaten me. You thought you could bully me out of my home. The crowd of neighbors grew bolder, nodding, whispering, filming every word. Some even shouted, "Yeah, and enough is enough." Carl's face flushed, his carefully polished control slipping under the weight of public scrutiny. "This isn't over, Hill," he spat, venom dripping from every word. "You think your little stun here makes you safe? You don't know who you're dealing with." Marcus's eyes locked on his, unblinking, unwavering. "No, Carl. You don't know who you're dealing with." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the real officers paused, sensing the gravity of that moment. Because Carl had just gone toe-to-toe with a man who wasn't just another neighbor. He had gone toe-to-toe with a Navy SEAL. And this war between Marcus and the HOA? It had only just begun. The tension in the air snapped like a brittle branch. The real officers moved in fast, wasting no time. "Turn around. Hands behind your back," one of them ordered. The two fake cops hesitated, their eyes darting toward Carl as though he might swoop in and save them. But Carl only folded his arms, jaw tight, his confidence suddenly looking like a cheap mask. "Wait! This is unnecessary," Carl barked. "They were just doing their jobs." "Impersonating officers is not a job," the lead officer shot back. "It's a felony. They're coming with us." With a swift motion, both imposters were cuffed. The taller one muttered curses under his breath, while the shorter one kept glancing at Carl, his voice trembling. "You said we'd be protected. You said—" "Quiet!" Carl hissed, but it was too late. The neighbors heard it. The cameras caught it. And whispers rolled through the crowd like thunder. "Mobile phone, he set this up. Mobile phone, Carl's behind all of it. Mobile phone, this is going viral." One by one, neighbors stepped closer, emboldened by the sight of the fake cops being dragged toward the patrol car. Someone shouted, "About time." Another neighbor yelled, "You've been abusing your power for years, Carl." Carl's face reddened, but his polished politician's smile snapped back into place. He turned toward the officers with feigned calm. "Gentlemen, let's not be rash. I'm sure we can handle this internally." The second officer cut him off sharply. "Internally? Sir, this isn't a playground dispute. Hiring or directing men to impersonate law enforcement is a serious offense. You're lucky we're not putting cuffs on you right now." That last sentence lit a fire in the crowd. Cheers erupted, and phones swung back toward Carl, recording every twitch of his jaw, every bead of sweat forming at his hairline. For the first time, the king of the HOA looked cornered. Marcus stood silently in the center of it all, his arms folded across his chest, his expression unreadable. He didn't need to gloat. He didn't need to shout. His very presence was enough, a rock that Carl's storm couldn't move. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice calm but razor-sharp. "This neighborhood deserves better than a dictator hiding behind fake authority. You tried to scare me out of my home. You failed. Now everyone knows who you really are." The crowd murmured their agreement. Some neighbors even clapped, their voices rising in support. "That's right. We stand with Marcus." Carl's mask cracked. His smile faltered. He turned on Marcus, his words low and venomous, meant only for him. "You think you've won today, Navy boy? This is my neighborhood. My board. My rules. You won't last here." Marcus didn't flinch. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Carl could hear. "You just made the worst mistake of your life. You came at me like a coward. Next time, come at me like a man. See how far you get." Carl's jaw tightened. The smirk was gone. Only rage remained. The real officers escorted the cuffed imposters into the back of the patrol car. Doors slammed shut. Engines roared to life. And just like that, the fake authority Carl had built crumbled before the entire neighborhood. But Carl wasn't done. As the police car pulled away, he straightened his shirt and turned to the crowd, his voice booming like a preacher trying to rally his flock. "Don't be fooled by him," he shouted, pointing at Marcus. "He's dangerous. He doesn't respect our rules, our way of life. This neighborhood will fall apart if we let people like him walk all over us." But the crowd didn't rally. They didn't cheer. Instead, they stared at him with narrowed eyes, some shaking their heads, others whispering under their breath. The tide had turned, and Carl knew it. Marcus, standing tall in the fading sunlight, gave Carl a look that could cut steel. "You tried to use fear to control people. But fear doesn't work on me." And now, his eyes swept across the neighbors, his voice louder, stronger. "It won't work on them either." The applause that followed was thunderous. The neighbors had chosen their side. Carl's fists clenched at his sides. His empire was crumbling, his power slipping. But deep inside, his rage burned hotter than ever. He leaned closer to Marcus one last time, hissing words like a snake ready to strike. "This isn't over, Hill. You may have won this battle. But the war? The war has just begun." Marcus didn't even blink. "Good," he said softly. "I like wars." The crowd erupted again, and for the first time in years, Carl Whitmore, the self-proclaimed king of the HOA, looked small. But small men with wounded pride can be the most dangerous of all. The neighborhood hadn't been this alive in years. The video of Carl's fake cops being hauled away was already circulating. Overnight, Marcus Hill became the quiet hero of the cul-de-sac. Cars slowed down as drivers waved. Neighbors he'd never spoken to stopped by his lawn with coffee, cookies, and words like "We're glad you stood up to him." But for every cheer, there was a shadow. Carl Whitmore was far from finished. Inside the sterile boardroom of the HOA, with its polished oak table and a wall lined with framed photos of community events, Carl sat at the head of the table. His hands were clasped tight, knuckles white, as he glared at the nervous faces of the board members. "We cannot let this man, this Navy thug, tear down everything we've built," Carl spat, his voice low but sharp as glass. One of the older board members cleared his throat. "Carl, with all due respect, what you did, authorizing men to impersonate officers, was reckless. The neighborhood's talking. Some are even demanding your resignation." Carl's jaw twitched. "Resignation? I am this neighborhood. Without me, this place falls apart. You think order maintains itself? You think property values rise on their own? No. It's because of me. Because I enforce the rules." Another member, a woman named Linda, folded her arms. "Enforce? Or abuse? Carl, you've gone too far. People are siding with Marcus. He's respected." The word hit Carl like a slap. Respected. The very thing he craved and never truly had. He leaned forward, his voice dropping into a hiss. "Respected? He's an outsider. A brute. Do you want a man like that dictating how this neighborhood runs? If we don't act, he'll rally the others against us. Against me." Silence fell. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Some avoided Carl's eyes altogether. For the first time, cracks appeared in the foundation of his control. Carl saw it, and his rage boiled. But he masked it with a smile. "Don't worry," he said smoothly, shifting his tone like a seasoned manipulator. "I have a plan." Meanwhile, Marcus sat on his porch as dusk painted the sky in shades of crimson and gold. The quiet hum of cicadas filled the air. For the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. But peace never lasted long for men like him. He knew Carl wouldn't stop. He knew predators best, they always struck again when their pride was wounded. And Carl Whitmore's pride had been shattered. His instincts told him to prepare. Not with weapons, not with fists, but with awareness. A Navy SEAL didn't just fight battles on the battlefield, he anticipated them long before they began. As he sipped his coffee, a neighbor named Mrs. Alvarez approached, wringing her hands nervously. "Marcus," she whispered, glancing around as if Carl himself might be hiding in the hedges. "You should know. Carl held a meeting today. He's planning something." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What kind of something?" She shook her head. "I don't know the details, but he looked desperate. And when Carl's desperate, people get hurt." Marcus gave her a reassuring nod. "Thank you. Stay alert. And don't worry, I can handle Carl." But even as he said it, he knew this wasn't going to be a simple feud. This was becoming a war of influence, of perception, of power. Back in the boardroom, Carl's voice grew darker. "If the bylaws won't scare him, we'll make new ones. Emergency measures. Fines so steep even he can't afford them. We'll drag him through court if we have to. And if that doesn't work..." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "We'll remind him that this is my neighborhood, not his." One board member shifted uncomfortably. "Carl, you're crossing into dangerous territory again. We can't." Carl slammed his hand on the table, silencing the room. "Enough. You either stand with me, or you stand against me." Silence answered him. And in that silence, Carl realized something terrifying. The loyalty he once commanded was slipping away. But instead of fear, he felt something else. A twisted excitement. Because Carl thrived in conflict. And if Marcus wanted war, he would get one. That night, as Marcus locked his door and scanned the quiet street, his gut tightened. The neighborhood looked peaceful, but peace was always the best disguise for danger. He whispered to himself, almost like a soldier back in hostile territory, "Stay sharp. The real fight hasn't even started." And somewhere across the cul-de-sac, behind drawn curtains, Carl Whitmore sat in his study, scribbling names, drafting new rules, and plotting his next strike, eyes burning with the kind of fury that only comes from humiliation. The HOA was no longer a community organization. It was becoming Carl's weapon. And Marcus was its target. The next HOA meeting was unlike any the neighborhood had ever seen. The community center, usually half empty during Carl's long-winded speeches, was overflowing. Neighbors packed every seat, stood against the walls, even spilled into the hallway. Everyone was buzzing with tension, waiting to see what Carl Whitmore would do next. At the front of the room, Carl adjusted his tie and tapped the microphone. His face was pale, but his eyes gleamed with the fury of a man cornered. He shuffled papers in front of him, new emergency bylaws he had drafted overnight. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carl began, forcing confidence into his voice, "our community is under threat. One man believes he can disregard our rules, disrespect our order, and turn this neighborhood into chaos. I will not allow that." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some frowned, others rolled their eyes. Carl held up the papers dramatically. "Effective immediately, we are enacting stricter regulations. Noise ordinances, landscaping requirements, military-grade vehicles prohibited." His gaze flicked toward Marcus. "And any violation will carry fines of up to $10,000. Gasps filled the room. One neighbor shouted, "That's outrageous." Another yelled, "You can't just make up rules overnight." Carl slammed his fist on the podium. "I can, and I will. I am protecting your property values. I am protecting your way of life." But the tide was already against him. Marcus rose slowly from his seat near the back, his presence commanding silence without a word. Every head turned. He walked forward with measured steps, his broad shoulders cutting through the crowd until he stood just a few feet from Carl. "You think this is about rules?" Marcus's voice boomed, calm but unshakable. "This is about control. You hired men to impersonate police. You tried to intimidate me in front of my neighbors. And now, when your lies are exposed, you hide behind paper and signatures." The crowd erupted, some clapping, some cheering. Phones shot into the air, recording every moment. Carl's mask cracked. His voice turned shrill. "Don't listen to him. He's a thug. He'll bring nothing but danger to this neighborhood. Marcus leaned forward, locking eyes with him. You don't know what danger is. I've faced real enemies, men with weapons, men with power, men who wanted to destroy everything I stood for. And you know what? He paused, letting silence fill the room. They didn't scare me. And neither do you. The room went dead silent. For the first time, Carl's voice faltered. You can't talk to me like that. I run this neighborhood. No, Marcus cut in sharply. This neighborhood runs itself. These people are tired of being ruled by fear. Today, Carl, your reign ends. The crowd exploded into cheers, louder than before. Neighbors stood, chanting Marcus's name. Someone yelled, "Vote him out." Another shouted, "Enough with Carl." One of the board members, Linda, seized the moment. She stood and raised her voice over the noise. I motion to remove Carl Whitmore as HOA president, effective immediately. Seconded, another member called. The cheers grew deafening. Carl's face drained of color. He pounded the podium. You can't do this to me. I built this place. I made it what it is. But his voice was drowned out by the unified roar of his neighbors. The vote was swift, brutal, and final. Carl Whitmore was stripped of power before he even realized it was happening. Security, summoned by the board, arrived to escort him out. His protests echoed down the hallway, desperate and pathetic. This isn't over. You'll regret this. But no one listened. Later that night, the cul-de-sac was alive with laughter. Neighbors gathered on Marcus's lawn, children running in the grass while adults shared food, drinks, and relief. The atmosphere was lighter than it had been in years, free, as if a storm had finally passed. Marcus stood quietly near the edge of the crowd, sipping his coffee, watching people smile again. Mrs. Alvarez approached, her eyes warm. You saved us, Marcus. You didn't just stand up for yourself, you stood up for all of us. Marcus gave a small smile. I didn't save anyone. You all saved yourselves. All I did was remind you that fear only works if you let it. The neighbors cheered again, lifting glasses in his honor. As the night wound down and the stars filled the sky, Marcus finally allowed himself to relax. The war was over. Carl was gone. The neighborhood had taken its power back. But deep inside, Marcus knew something most of them didn't. There would always be another Carl somewhere, another bully, another tyrant, another man who thought fear was power. And if that day ever came again, Marcus Hill, the Navy SEAL who refused to be broken, would be ready.